Mr. Chair.
The Honourable Todd McLean.
Mr. Chair, thank you very much, and I want to speak in the debate at the moment around revenue. And I do want to say that when the Honourable Clayton Cosgrove was speaking, I did particularly enjoy his interventions. The challenge was very little, in fact nothing he said in there was correct. Very unusual because he is a wise man. He does get very excited when it comes to speaking, particularly when David Bennett interjects. And I would say it reminded me of when I saw him earlier today, Mr. Chair, down in the gym, beside the cycle there. His little legs were going as fast as they could. There was sweat on his brow, the very, very serious look on his face. And I suddenly realised he was just trying to get up on the seat. And it's very much like his speech here in the House, because, Mr. Speaker, very excited he was, but there wasn't very much of relevance in it. You see, Mr. Speaker, the government has underway a very large and ambitious project for inland revenue to transform and modernise, and simplify tax administration in New Zealand. And it's as straightforward and simple as this. Our desire is to find ways to make it easier for New Zealanders to comply with their tax obligation, to reduce the administrative burden upon them when it comes to paying tax, to modernise the tax system so it works for them, and certainly so it works for government, works for inland revenue. This will be broken down into a number of chunks. We've just had 2 green papers that we've put out where we had more than 1,000 interactions with the public, very significant when it comes to taxation, members of the public, businesses telling us what they thought we might do to improve tax administration. Now, a very important part of this, Mr. Chairman, was around provisional tax, making provisional tax simpler, making it easier. We put out a green paper. We said to the public, we want to hear from you, put in a submission. And after the submission date closed, all of a sudden, the Leader of the Opposition came out with a policy around provisional tax. And he said, PAYE for businesses. The problem with that, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chairman, it was less a policy, it was more a late submission to our green paper, because actually that was what was in the green paper. In the green paper, it said, what about PAYE for businesses to reduce the burden upon them? And it's good to see that the Leader of the Opposition, Mr. Little, put in a late submission supporting the government's proposal. We thank him for that. I have another green paper and tax coming out soon. If he just waits, he could actually put in a submission to that as well. If he only asks, we can extend the deadline if he can't get the work done. But do you know, Mr. Chair, why I think Mr. Little did that on that Friday? Because earlier in the week, Mr. Twyford had made a great error of judgment. He had got some dodgy numbers. He had put a few names together and decided to beat up on a very important constituent group in New Zealand, the Chinese community. But actually, he didn't beat up on the Chinese community, just a whole lot of people with Chinese-sounding names. And at the end of that week, I think that this announcement that the Leader of the Opposition made around provisional tax that I'd already released some months earlier was to divert attention away from the horrible, horrible things that Mr. Twyford had said about Chinese New Zealanders. Well, actually, New Zealanders with Chinese-sounding names. So the other part of business transformation during the course of this year, we're going to look at secondary tax because the system does burden new hard-working New Zealanders. You'll see some changes around the PAYE system and GST announced this year that will make it easier for people to comply with GST. And actually, our focus will be around small and medium-sized enterprises as well as others, but we want to reduce the economic burden upon them, Mr. Chairman. Business transformation, as I said in the committee, will go across a number of parliaments. It's been here for 2 already, and I've extended an invitation to the committee to make inland revenue officials available to them to work through some of the detail so that actually the parliament as a whole can focus on what's best for our business community and taxpayers, and maybe that will help Mr. Cosgrove with those fast little legs go and get it right when it comes to business transformation and the work that we're doing. The other important thing that's just happened, Mr. Chair, is around property tax compliance. Now, we heard from Mr. Cosgrove about all the problems in the current the current consultation. And again, actually, unfortunately, he's wrong. As a government, we've given Inland Revenue a lot of extra money in successive budgets to focus on property tax compliance, and they've brought back hundreds of millions of dollars of additional tax on people that should have been paying based upon the properties that they bought and they sold. Well, indeed, Mr. Chairman, we announced a bright line test to focus more clearly on this, to make it easier for people to understand their obligations. That's out for consultation as well. Mr. Little should send his policy in now rather than a late submission afterwards, but we're working in the right direction.